On the Writer's Gym podcast today, we're going to be talking about that glaring white first page of your story and ways to help yourself to begin stories, audio dramas or whatever. Welcome to the Writer's Gym podcast. The Writer's Gym podcast. Build creative confidence and grow your writing life with Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen. As usual, we have Rachel Knightley and
Hello.
Emily Inkpen.
Hello.
So, I'm going to start with you, Rachel. That glaring white first page that we've talked about. What are your approaches to that first page?
Before any technical answers whatsoever, a spoiler.
Oh.
You don't know how you're going to begin until you end.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
You can make so many sensible decisions, and a lot of them will be lots of fun and you will discover lots and lots of things. But if I could send one message back to previous Rachel through time, it would be you can't edit what you haven't written.
Yes.
And that goes for the whole journey. So doing what gets you going and then going and carrying on, all good. Everything we're going to say here today is less important than knowing you can't make that decision until that decision makes itself.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't realise we would get this philosophical this quickly, but I think that's a really good...
I mean, the fear of the
That's
blank page, it's quite, it's quite potent, I think.
Yeah.
Is the,
So I live in my brain and it always sounds like that. So I will take philosophical and I will raise you practical and answer your actual question, Chris. How about that? Here are some of the ways you can do it. Number one, pick a lane. I picture that like driving. As much as I hate driving and love writing, it could work with swimming, but pick a lane. So that might be a writing prompt. It might be stick your hand in the envelope and pick an object, a setting, or whatever your prompt is that day, and just go for it, because the one cure for a blank page is to stop it being blank. I do not mean to downplay how huge this feels, but my God, the route through it is direct. Pick a lane and go with it. When I wrote your creative writing toolkit, the first draft commandments, the 5 first draft commandments, the first one was thou shalt not edit or criticise thyself, because the place for that is when you've seen the thing, not when you think you can do the work in your head before it lands on the page. But the second one is a writing prompt is a diving board, not a dive. It is not about controlling what happens. It is not about analysing whether you've made the best decision or not. You are going to work from a stimulus. You are not going to be in control of what happens. And I can absolutely promise you that you'll find how to finish if you allow yourself to start.
Emily?
For me, understanding that a first sentence doesn't necessarily come first. That you can find your first sentence when you're halfway through writing the book. And then it will come to you and you'll go back to the beginning. You'll put it in there. You'll carry on with the book. And then you will come back and it will go in with your editing process. Something that really works for me if I'm having trouble getting into writing is if I know there's a key conversation that needs to happen between 2 characters, I will write that conversation. It doesn't matter if it's a conversation that happens early or late. I will write that conversation and then I will write what happens next, or I will write what leads up to it. And I will eventually expand out from that point until I either reach the beginning of the book where it all began before it got to that conversation and the conversations that went on before it, or afterwards. You don't have to start a book from the beginning of chapter 1. You can start writing a book from chapter 3. This is a conversation that happens in chapter 3, and then it's an exercise of just getting there when you go back and fill in what happens from the beginning to that point. But at least then you are not faced with a blank page. You know where you're getting to. You've got a heading. You've got a solid chunk of action and even character development at that point. By the end of that conversation that you know has to happen, you have a better idea of who this character is and who they're talking to. And then after that, starting the book, you're already there on a firmer footing with that character and with their viewpoint.
Yeah.
And that can be an excellent place to start, or not start, as is the case may be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to really get into the psychology of starting. And this applies to lots of other things, not just to writing, of course. But that is a good first point, isn't it? Pick something that you can easily begin with. And I think a lot of writers would understand the gravity of the first page, the importance of the first page, and probably that's not a good place to start.
And can we talk about the word easily?
Yeah.
Because you just said easily. And when people come to me and say, oh, well, obviously first person is easier than third person, or obviously third person is easier than first person, or obviously it's easier to talk about this than that, and somebody says the opposite, that's because you're you and they're not. And if something feels easy, it's like if something tastes nice. It's not, what does that say about me?
Yeah.
Should I be making myself miserable by learning to do it a different way rather than the one that comes naturally? You've got something to say. The psychology of beginning is all about finding ways to do it and stop getting stuck in your head and connect with the notebook, the computer, the whatever you are doing. That's what it's all for in the end. So keeping a sense of what the objective is so crucial, because if you make it about there being a right answer and a wrong answer, then you're not writing with freedom, you're not finding your voice, you're desperately trying to find the right answers to an exam you're not even sitting.
You are yourself the examiner. I've got a friend who vowed early in their writing career that they would never write in first person, and then they did, and those are the books that have got published.
Right.
And with that, I was having a conversation the other day where I heard myself say to this client, present tense is coffee, past tense is tea. And it's the best answer I've ever heard. And I know it's mine, but I'm still going to say that because it's not about better or worse. Yes, my English teacher and maybe yours would have said present tense was less formal and less good. I genuinely, this still makes me clench every muscle in my body. I did hear a creative writing teacher once say to a group that past tense was better than present tense to write in. I am still recovering. The idea that you would say to creative writing students, not this is my taste and it might not be yours and that's okay, but this way is better than that way. Oh dear. Commandment number 3, first draft commandments, aim to be interested, not interesting.
Yeah.
Because we can feel so overwhelmed, we can feel so nervous about whether we're being interesting or whether it's good or whether it's this word or that word, when actually you need to invest in finding out what you're interested in order for it to be good in terms of what it actually is. You don't find that out in your head, you find that out in the world.
You are interested in the journey, not you are writing an interesting journey.
Yeah,
because the journey will be interesting.
And you've got to keep showing up, haven't you? You've got to be engaged enough and interested enough in it to keep showing up in order to keep writing the thing.
Trying to be interesting every single day is exhausting. Can you oh my God, I don't find myself interesting. If I try to be interesting, it's just such hard work. Really? No, I can't. No, I'm interested in everything. Am I myself interesting? Oh no, hard work.
I mean, I think that's we may do a future podcast about traits of writers.
Oh, I thought you were going to say about how interesting is Emily.
Well,
if not, why not?
And we'll do a how interesting is Rachel as well.
Quite right.
I am open to feedback, I would just like to say.
But I mean, getting back to the practicalities and the challenges of starting, I want to ask you both about the importance of planning in getting started. Rachel, would you start with a plan and work from it, or would you start with, as Emily suggested, a conversation or something from deeper into the book?
If we're talking started as in when an idea comes to me, I start when the idea comes to me. So the thing that David Lynch with Go Where the Fish Are taught me is it's no good sitting in the middle of the Sahara Desert with your fishing rod wondering why the ideas aren't coming, what's wrong with me as a writer. You need to work out what the river is for you and make sure your life allows you to go to it a lot. The true answer is the idea starts it, and the responsibility on me is to write it down when it arrives, not think, oh, what a good idea, I'm sure I'll remember that later, because we all know how well that works. What I will always do is I will always listen, I will always transcribe, and this is how you get started as far as I'm concerned, is that you transcribe what is in your head, just like you're pressing play on a dictaphone. You put down what you're hearing honestly, authentically. You can and you will edit it, change it, develop it later, but it's all about getting that raw material so that you can explore it and know that first draft commandment number 4, there is no wrong answer. That's what I need to say to myself over and over again, because we've talked about feedback in a previous episode, and so much damage can be done to so many people by some teacher or some industry professional or somebody somewhere making you feel like you're not invited to the party, like you're somehow fundamentally wrong in how you've got your ideas. And that sticks around far longer than all the lovely things that other people have said along the way. It just does. Which is why you need to always write down feedback as well as ideas, including the good stuff. But there is no wrong answer. Get it down and keep moving.
Emily, are you a planner or someone who plunges straight in?
So there are 2 ways. I always try to have a destination in mind. I know where I want this story to go. Often I'll know some key beats that I want to hit along the way. If I'm writing a short story, it's very different. I normally have an image in my head of something, and then the story comes from it or leads to it. And I guess it's an amalgamation of all things. If, for instance, if I often listen to music a lot, and I visualize things while I'm listening to music. Sometimes I've got these pieces of music and I've imagined whole scenes, and then I realize that scene would happen at this point on the timeline, or that point on the timeline. For years, I might have been building up a patchwork of moments that I then have to string together into this story. But they will naturally have started to appear in an order in my head, or there will be an occasion that will fit here and there's a thing that happens that fits there. And naturally then, it's just a case of getting the pieces that I've already got and sort of laying them out and going, okay, right, so this happens in this order, this happens in that order. I'm a great one for writing myself draft emails. So snippets of things that happen, descriptions, you can write them anywhere on the go. Then if you've got it in a draft email, you can access it from wherever.
Yes.
And sometimes what I do at the beginning of something is I take all of those bits from the various places and I put them in a single document, in the document that I'm writing in. And then it's like I've already got stepping stones at different points in the narrative.
Can I just agree with that, please?
Certainly, you can agree as much as you like.
I call them lily pads.
Lily pads, okay.
One is a frog. The work is a pond. I like to have about 5 or some odd number of lily pads, so there's a beginning, middle, end thing going on. And I have my key lily pad scenes that get me from the beginning to the end, so I know my destination, I know my key lily pads in the middle.
So you call it lily pads, I call that lighting of the beacons, where the scene from Lord of the Rings where there's the beacons and you can see them all lighting, and I know where my beacons are, and I can see them lighting in a line, but how I get to the beacons is different. It can be, I mean, one has to ask.
Broadly, you know where you're going.
One knows where one is going. I have to say, there is the question that arises, who the hell did they stick up on those mountains and what did they do to deserve that? Because those people, how did they, there are so many questions with that sequence that I just kind of want to write a fan fiction about, Ed and Fred who were up on beacon number 3 and what they did to deserve being there, and and this one moment where it happened and they got to light the beacon.
Are you going to?
It would be great, wouldn't it? I'd love to. I wonder how many people... Listeners, if you are listening and you would like to hear the fan fiction of Ed and Fred, the beacon lighters in Lord of the Rings, please let me know.
It could be Emily's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
It could be, yes.
Homework,
yes. Sorry, tangent there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was going to mention, from what you've been saying there are a number of ways of collecting, almost scrapbooking, you might say, stuff that is going to go into your story. And you've kind of touched on something that I wanted to expand a bit more on. You've talked about listening to music, and we sometimes have writers create mood boards, and mood boards can be collections of pictures, they can be words, they can be playlists of different sorts of music. Not necessarily that we're going to put that music into our production if it's a radio drama, but that music gets you into the mood.
Yeah.
Is that something that the two of you have used?
I
Yes.
do. I absolutely do. You know, I'm actually looking around my living room right now where we are, and I am realising quite how much I do that when you surround yourself with things that might link to your story in a way only you know how. It's not always a literal mood board, but surrounding yourself with writing prompts that aren't absolute writing prompts as in you're doing the writing now, but they absolutely come into it. I find that enormously helpful. So I've got a painting over the fireplace that my ex-singing teacher did, where it's a woman with big brown hair in a red dress walking down a railway line in the middle of a wood, and she doesn't have a face. Her face is not visible on it and is transparent. And for me, that was actually a very positive image. I walked into her living room and I had a singing lesson one day, and I absolutely fell in love with that, because I went, yes, our identity does change as we move through life. And that's something that's informed both the writing projects that I'm working on at the moment, and it's right by my desk. So mood boards might mean different things to different listeners. It doesn't mean that if making a picture of it or a playlist on Spotify, if that isn't what speaks to you, definitely find what does, because writing prompts aren't just pick one and go for it. They are the situation you surround yourself with.
Yeah, that's true. I think, there's a lot of people who write dark academia who will write they will light a candle, one of those candles that you pick up and you carry around. They'll have like one of those on the desk, and they'll light the candle before they start. And, they might even decorate their home in the style of, and being able to walk into that environment and then...
It's finding your rituals, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's so important.
Yeah.
Because a ritual is not done for its own sake. It's done for what it invokes. It's done for what it summons in you. And finding the ones that work for you. Like candles absolutely work for me, because I have to babysit the candle. I have to stay on that sofa and do that writing. And that works. It means I don't go, I'll just go and do the washing. I'll just go and do this other thing. It keeps me there.
Yeah, it keeps you still. Yeah. For me, it is music. I have playlists, but a lot of people have playlists for the book, but I have playlists per character, and that really helps me because I do multiple POVs depending on the chapter. Like I have POV per chapter, and if I've got a playlist for the character, it helps me to get into their headspace before I write their chapter. It can really help with changing of tone and things like that. But then I've realised that actually there are songs, I've got the same playlist for the kids during the Dex Legacy and during the books. And there are songs on there that I'm like, no, this is a very teenage them. Oh, this is a very mature them. And that's interesting. I have thought about splitting them out into different age groups because, what I was listening to when I was a teenager is not what I listen to now. And for character, it's exactly the same. Getting into the headspace of 15-year-old Isra versus 26-year-old Isra is,
very, very different place and process.
Very different world.
Yeah. Subscribe to The Writer's Gym by searching for us in your favourite podcast app and clicking follow, favourite or subscribe to be informed the moment we release new episodes and to have access to all our past editions. So I want to ask now about whether targets are a useful tool when you're starting something. By a target, I guess we could mean a word count or to get to a certain point in our plot or story.
Or Rachel's catchphrase, give me a deadline, Chris.
Well, yeah. I mean, but this is a much more internal thing, isn't it? Because it's not the date by which you must deliver the manuscript. It's you starting something and challenging yourself, I guess, to get to a certain point.
The thing is, I really like deadlines, in case that wasn't clear, because if you know you've got to do something by, let's say, this time next week, even if it's not an actual in-the-world deadline, then you stop falling into the perfectionism, procrastination, spinning coin trap, and you make something happen, which you can then develop. So what I do is I say to myself, what if I was being offered several £100s to get this page done by 2:00 this afternoon, or this chapter done by this time next week, or whatever feels reasonable but a tiny bit of a push. Because if it feels too reasonable, it kind of undermines the mentality of it.
Yes.
I really like doing that because it keeps me in the world. It keeps me putting things out of my head and onto the pages so that I keep moving forward, evolving, and that builds my confidence, because the more you haven't done, the easier it is to add another day in which you haven't done anything. And the reasons you give yourself will always be absolutely true reasons. There will always be other things going on in the world. I think for me it's all about finding, how do we work with our feelings, not against them? So we're not waiting for our feelings about the writing to be perfect, or the time in which we can write to be perfect. It's how we respond to that. And that, for me, that's definitely my way of doing it, is even if it's just texting a friend and going, Bum is going to hit the chair, Bum is going to stay on chair while write for this hour or this many words or whatever it is, and you go, yay. And obviously my coaching clients have groups with me and with each other that do that, but it's something you can do with a non-writer. It's something you can just write on a post-it note and have next to your computer. We're not getting up until we've done these 500 words.
I used to do writing sprints on Twitch. So I'm thinking of getting back into them, because it was really fun. Like, people would join and then we'd do writing for 25 minutes and then we'd have a 10-minute break. During the 10-minute break, I would read from one of Ursula Le Guin's on writing books, or, we were reading a bit of Stephen King's on writing as well. And so during the break, there would be a bit of, while people got up and made cups of tea or something, I'd basically be doing, about writing story time. And then we'd go back into writing. And that was a lot of fun.
We have something like that every Monday morning. We come to the writing room, and if you begin the week feeling like a writer when it's not necessarily your job or part of your life, then it's not something that waits till the weekend. It's something that is a little bit there every day. And I still find that enormously useful. Yes, I'm the one running it, but it's just, I want to model that behaviour. I want to say, it's not about suddenly feeling super confident, and there's no time where you walk through that mirror and suddenly your mentality and your feelings are totally different.
No.
Writing is writing, humans are humans. We are absolutely all in this together.
Yeah. I need those deadlines. But for me, it's because I have multiple projects going on. So I need to know what to write and prioritise. So it's like, I could be writing, like, I'll write every day. But if I know that I need to get that bit of writing done by next week, I'll prioritise writing that over any of my other projects. When I'm working for, I've got a friend who I'm doing some work for at the moment, and they say, you've got to do this thing. Okay, when's it due? Oh, there's no hurry. There's no hurry, just take your time with it. And I'm like, okay, fine. And I do all of the other things because I'm busy with all of these other things. And then, 2 weekends later, they're like, so where are you with it?
Yeah.
And I'm like, so there was a deadline then. There was a sort of end point. Like, take your time meant take your time for 2 weeks.
Yeah, which it would have been so easy to say.
Yeah.
How does 2 weeks sound to you? It doesn't, if somebody's worried about, I'm not saying they are, but if somebody's worried about making that happen, you can always do what I think we do, where you say, where Chris will say, how about this date? And I will say, yes, please, or the day before, or whatever I say. And it's fine, because then you've got some shape to your reality.
Exactly. And this is the thing. It's like, it's a structure thing. And I have got quite a few plates spinning. Keeping the plates in the air requires constant jiggling, but you got to know which plates are the really important ones to not let fall. The really important plates.
So we were talking about planning as a means of helping us to get started in writing. But Emily, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that planning. And we talked a few podcasts ago about world building.
Oh, yeah.
For you starting one of your stories, how much world building would you want to do before you start to write some story? What's the right ratio, the right balance there, do you think?
I do very little before I start. It happens as I go. And I think that's very important, because if you do too much up front, you might not use any of it. You want to do the world building that is relevant to what you're writing and to your characters. And the world building will happen. You will undoubtedly, along the journey, mentally take little side quests that flesh out your world in different directions that you might not actually explore in the narrative. But I know that a lot of people will set out to write a book and will make a world first. And they might have been building this world for 2 years, and filled 20 notebooks with details about this world and the magic system and the planetary orbit and the ecosystems and all the rest of it. And I say, oh, great, who are your characters? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the journey? What are they doing in it? I don't know that yet. And it's like, well, then you're not writing a book, are you? You are building a world. You need to start with the actual writing of the book. There is a point where world building becomes procrastination. And if you are world building, you are not book writing. You are, there is a point where they do not overlap.
The world in this context is there to serve the story. The story is not there to serve the world.
Yes.
And if you have it that way round, you can so accidentally be trying to do justice to all the world building and the research that you've done, forgetting that the reason you're here in the first place is the story and taking us through the transformation that happens to somebody as a result of being in that world.
Yeah.
And the world may very well change, but the world is not the end point. The story is.
Yeah. And if it's scary, if you are building a world and you haven't got characters and you haven't got a story, what can be a good way to break that is to write little short stories, maybe even for flash fictions, about people in locations in your world.
Yes.
So go into a particular town, find a person, tell their story, tell a small adventure that they go on. Don't commit to a whole book, but as soon as you start to go into those details, find the people in the world and find ways to bring that world to life through a character's point of view, then you're going to start getting into your world in a way that you can really communicate to people, This
is how point of view is the answer to almost any question we ask ourselves in creative writing. Point of view is the thing that makes all the other things easier. Because what you've just described is, okay, we're jumping into this head and what's important to them, and then we're going to go over and find another head and what's important to them. And one of them will speak to you more than the others, and you'll do more of that one if you want to, and you're in.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're done. And you're like, oh, okay, no, I am with this person in this town. And she is going on an adventure because this thing needs to happen and she needs to get to that town and then back again. And there you have it. You have a story. That's brilliant. But you do need to go into a town and find somebody and tap on their shoulder and say, who are you? Brilliant. Let's have some fun. And
on it goes from there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the least dodgy way possible.
I was thinking there was something a little bit kind of dating app about that.
Yeah, although to be honest, no judgment. No. I mean, whatever genre you want to write in your
good point. Whatever few minutes you spend with each of those characters, as long as it's good for you.
Absolutely, yeah.
What's the world behind your erotica novel, readers?
Well, I mean, romantic fantasy is a thing, and that can go in many directions.
Everything is a thing, as the actress
Everything
said.
is a
I want to move on to something that I'm sure we've all experienced.
Oh God!
And this is going to sound terrible now. So it's the false start, and not the one that you're now thinking of. But
Too late.
the false start in writing. I mean, there must be behave, you two. There must be ways in which, and you must have done this many a time. Started off on a particular track for a story. Oh God!
You said it.
Join us next week, listeners. For
Somebody
It's all right.
started
I'm
this.
back. I'm
Okay,
back.
we're back.
Hello.
We're back.
Okay.
Serious, super serious.
this is all staying
what's
in
the
the
question?
podcast, by the way. So the false start. Can we learn from false starts? What should we do?
I
with
would
them?
congratulate yourself for a false start because, and that's everybody out there, not just the men. I would congratulate yourself for a false start because it means you've started. It means you've done something. And frankly, unless you've got to the end of the book or whatever it happens to be, you don't know truly that it is a false start. What it might be is the way you discovered X, Y, and Z and you'd never have discovered X, Y, and Z otherwise. Or it might be that you've replaced that apparent false start with a different start. And it might be that by the time you get to the end of the project, you've gone, oh no, I was right the first time. I have had that happen.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's about avoiding false starts. I think it's about reframing it into what it actually is, which is to congratulate yourself for getting that in the world, learning what you've learnt from it, and carrying on.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that there is definitely an element of just doing it and taking it as far as it can go. And you're giggling again, and I am going to start laughing. No, Yeah. Okay, so something that could be quite good for people to hear is that, like, I chatted to my agent about this a little while ago because I promised them another book, and this was classic. I sent them an email. They were like, pitch me another book. I was like, right, so I'm going to start working on a new book. These are my ideas, 3 separate ideas. Great, I love them all. Brilliant. Not useful. I wanted him to say that one, right? That would have been useful. No. Love them all. Apparently I'm very good at ideas. Then a little while later, I was working on a book. It was none of those 3 that I had pitched to him. So I sent him an email saying, just an FYI, I'm working on this one. It's not the one that I told you I'd be working on. It's a whole new one. And this is it. Brilliant. Yeah, love the sound of that. Great. So then I was writing this book, got about 50,000 words into it, and then realised that I just didn't know the characters well enough. There were things about these characters that I just didn't know the answer to. And I'd got quite far into the narrative and still couldn't tell you really important things about them. And that for me is a bit of a problem. And I realised that I needed them to sit with me for a bit longer and not force it. And I said this, I was very intensely aware of the fact that I promised my agent that I would send them a book by the summer, and then that didn't happen. And we went out for lunch just before Christmas, and I said, yeah, so that didn't happen. I realised that I was forcing it too early, and it was not going to. And he just said, no, you know what? Some writers, they'll start writing a book, 30,000 words in, they're like, no, not yet. 40,000 words in, no, not yet. Third one, great, finish it all the way through. And then that will be the one that sits right. And then they might go back to the one that they wrote. Now, I know that I'm going to go back to that one that I was writing, and I'm going to revisit it. I'm going to have the answers to the questions that I didn't have. I will make it right. I'll revive it and I'll finish the thing. But it just wasn't time yet for those characters. And I would call that a false start. But all the work that I've done on it so far, that 50,000 words is not lost.
But even as you're saying that, you're acknowledging that what was a false start will have its time. So maybe it's a question of how we hear that phrase, because when I heard that phrase, full start to me is like, oh, that didn't count, let's go back to the beginning of the race and start again. But actually what you're doing there is you're saying, I'm putting that back in the freezer, gonna thaw that out another day. It's gonna have its time, but not yet. And that's a really nice way to look at it. No matter what writing you're doing, it's part of Hemingway's iceberg of all the stuff that you know about the characters, write about the characters, that actually will always be below sea level. It won't make that final cut of the book that they eventually see. Or it might be a completely different book and you don't know yet, but it's never wasted.
No words are wasted.
No words are wasted.
None. Literally.
And I think that's a really, really positive note. So nothing you do at the start of your process is going to be a wholly bad thing, because even if you subsequently entirely abandon it, that realization that it's not the book that you should be writing is still of value, because it allows you then to move on to something else, and you have developed as a writer in that process. So all writing is good to some extent.
And Emily, where you are now with an agent and with books and experience behind you, it becomes possible, doesn't it, to know instinctively, intrinsically, that not everything has to go into this one anyway. You're able to put less pressure on yourself and to know that things can develop, things can happen. Whereas when people are just starting out and there's that horrible feeling that you've got to put everything you are and everything you could be into this one book, that's too much pressure. Whereas what we're talking about today is begin. And then there's that lovely thing, the Lewis Carroll, begin at the beginning, and then when you get to the end, stop. and no,
or if you're me, bring in halfway through and maybe don't. But
but also
maybe listen to Lewis Carroll better.
But also know that in order to do that, you're not going to do it chronologically and you're not going to do it sensibly. Writing is a lot of hard work, but you will find the time and you will find the people, and it might not be in the order you expect, and that's okay.
I want to then think about further down the road, as you've both described, your book, your story, your drama is at a point where you think you've got all the ingredients, and you have either written the opening or you need to write the opening. So I just want to think for a couple of minutes about openings and beginnings of stories and pieces of creative writing. Do you have any thoughts about what strong openings look like? You know, anything that we've mentioned so far that feeds into that?
You want the world to show it knows who it is. It doesn't need to be hitting you over the head with it. But if you take any opening line, or indeed any line from anywhere that you like, it knows who it is. Now, if I use examples, that's not fair, because any examples I used are from published works that have already been edited and re-edited, so I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to say, think of what drew you in and notice that it wasn't desperate. It was letting you come to it a certain amount.
Yeah.
Let the characters exist and speak for themselves. Don't helicopter parent the reader. Trust that they will find their way if you show them a world.
Yeah.
Preferably from inside somebody's head, because that is how the human condition operates in worlds.
Yeah. I think I learned a big lesson with my first book when I was subbing to agents. And I did the whole thing where you have to get into the action fast. Grab your reader's attention. You have to get right in there and, you know, and bring them into the story.
Start with a bang.
Start with a bang is always the way that they say it. And so I did. And all of the stuff happened really, you know, really fast from the beginning. And I got this feedback from an agent saying, all of this is too much. I don't know anything about this world. I don't know anything about these characters, and I need to know more. So I need at least 3 chapters before any of these things happen, where I get to know who these characters are in their environment before the incident occurs and before everything. And that has made a big difference to me. Now, as a writer, even if you start with a bang in your first draft, maybe then when you go back to it, just think, is the bang too soon? Have we jumped into the bang ahead of time? Or do we need a bit more lead up? And you can do that in writing, at least. You can do that retrospectively. And you can... now
there's a gap in the market.
I am just running with this now. Yeah, you can add a few chapters in. And actually hearing that feedback from an agent, and he invited me to submit again after I'd followed any or all of his feedback. And when I resubmitted, he asked for a full manuscript. So it was definitely the right thing to do. And that was the version of the book that was not by him, but eventually was picked up by my agent. So trusting your reader that, yeah, the bang is coming, but we're not there yet.
We're not there yet.
You know, the readers, if they like your work and if they like your characters, funnily enough,
you can sense the bang in your future.
They can sense the bang in your future, yes.
It's probably best we end there, I think. But
I think we just ended on a bang,
we always,
actually.
Absolutely. Pleasure working with you, darling.
Yeah. Good Lord. We always end our podcasts with an exercise, a challenge. Rachel, what have we got for this one?
If, in spite of hearing that the most important thing is to start to pick a lane and to see where you go, you still feel like, oh, I want something practical, I want something to just get me over the fear of the blank page, here are 2 things you can do. 1, turn up to my writing room every Monday. There's a lot of people in the same situation. 2, remember that there are, first draft commandment number 5, 7 basic plots, or 3 or 12, depending on who you ask, but there are infinite original voices. Only you can write what you are writing. And if you keep the curiosity, and if you keep the interest, you will find the paths, not path, the paths, all the things that are right for you. Keep going.
Well, that is a great way to end this podcast, I think. So, as always, Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, thank you so much for being with us on the Writers' Gym podcast today.
Thank you, Chris Gregory.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Writers' Gym podcast with Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, and me, Chris Gregory. If you'd like to learn more about Rachel and the Writers' Gym, please go to rachelknightley.com. To find out more about Emily, please go to emilyinkpen.com. And for Chris, go to alternativestories.com. We'll print all these links and more in the show notes for this podcast. The Writer's Gym podcast is an Alternative Stories 2024 production for the Writer's Gym. Production, sound design and editing were by me, Chris Gregory.